far as we know, human cognitive capacities have not changed for at least 50,000 years, when humans are some small group of hunter-gatherers left Africa and spread all over the world. We're all their descendants. I mean, maybe a little more complex than that, but not a lot more. Now, we know that pretty well. It's like, it's not that anyone understands the biological nature of it, but there's very strong evidence. So, for example, if you take an infant from some tribe in Papua New Guinea that hasn't had other human contact for 40,000 years, and that's a possibility, and you take that infant and you bring it to Oslo and raise it from infancy in Oslo, it'll be indistinguishable from the people studying physics in Oslo University. It has the same cognitive capacities. And conversely, you take an infant from here and put it in that tribe in Papua New Guinea, it'll be able to do all the complex cognitive tasks that they can solve, but that you and I couldn't possibly solve. We couldn't survive there for a week. So it looks from evidence like, from evidence like that, which is maybe not conclusive, but is certainly powerful, it seems that cognitive capacities just haven't changed. In fact, humans are genetically very much alike as compared with other species. And it's not surprising, because there's apparently a common origin not very long ago. 50,000 years is nothing in evolutionary time. It's an eye blink. So chances are that whatever the cognitive capacities were 50,000 years ago, they still are. Of course, they have to be brought out like other innate capacities. They have to be elicited by experience, but they're there, And I think that's, Hume wasn't thinking about evolution, of course, but when he talked about the common faculties that are given by the original hand of nature, I think must be what he meant. I mean, these were real problems in the 17th and 18th century. Remember that at the time of the early scientific revolution, that was also the time of the first real explorations. And explorers were finding all sorts of creatures that didn't look like Europeans, like Negroes and orangutans and so on. And they weren't sure how to distinguish them. So which ones, are some of them human or not? If you're a Cartesian rationalist, there's a sharp distinction between human and non-human. Cartesian rationalism is incompatible with racism. It's a point that historian of philosophy Harry Bracken has discussed at length. You can't be a rationalist and a racist. You either have a mind or you don't have a mind. And if you have a mind, it's the same. There's only one, so that's it. You can't. Empiricists, on the other hand, could be racist because you can have different properties. And these were hotly debated issues in the 17th and 18th century. They couldn't figure out what those other creatures were. Were they humans or weren't they? If they were, did they have rights? And if so, what rights? And so on. But of course, that's long past. And now there's just humans were apparently essentially all alike. And there could be a study of what our common cognitive capacities are. In fact, it's studied quite a lot. So when you study what the way, say, infants determine the continuity of objects on the basis of very scattered data, you're essentially asking the kinds of questions that Descartes asked. Descartes actually, people don't, unfortunately, philosophers these days tend only to read the Meditations. But that's not Descartes. In fact, that was kind of propaganda. He even pointed that out. The famous letter he wrote to his friend Mersenne, where he said that the point of the Meditations is to try to convince the Jesuits to take his physics seriously. That's what he really cared about. When he wrote Principles of Philosophy, that means Principles of Science. That's the real stuff. And in that work, and in the optics and other things, he posed very interesting questions. He didn't carry out the experiments, but he carried out thought experiments, very much the way Galileo did. But if you carried them out, they'd probably come out his way. So like one was to ask the question, they said, imagine an infant who has had no experience with geometrical figures, okay? Which in fact is every infant, because geometrical figures don't exist in nature, just some other things. But so take an infant with no experience with geometrical figures, present that infant with a triangle drawn on paper. They said what the infant will perceive is a distorted triangle, not a perfect instance of whatever crazy figure it is, you know, with the two lines not quite coming together, and one of them somewhat curved, and so on. And he regarded that as kind of paradoxical. Why should that be true? And if you're a thoroughgoing empiricist, you shouldn't permit that conclusion. In fact, since the conclusion is almost certainly correct, it's an easy refutation of standard empiricism. And his conclusion, Descartes' conclusion, was, well, we must have some innate system of, he would assume, Euclidean geometry, which we impose on data to yield our understanding, in fact, our perception. And there's quite a lot of work in the speculation through the 18th and 17th century on how this could be, and the basic ideas are probably correct. There's now a lot of experimental work and with infants and comparative work investigating it. And that is at the beginnings of work trying to find out what our cognitive capacities are. There's also work on something like rudimentary science forming, how do children develop a concept that the world acts in some rational fashion. A lot of this developed out of Piaget's work, even though it doesn't stand up as he presented it. That kind of work has been pursued.